I bought the only cell tower serving the HOA. Now their gate codes answer to me. How could owning a single cell tower change the balance of power? And what does it really mean when gate codes answer to someone else? Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy gripping stories filled with unexpected turns, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Your support means a great deal, and we truly appreciate you spending your time here with us. Thank you for watching, commenting, and helping this community continue to grow. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Now, let us begin the story. I've learned that people rarely pay attention to the thing quietly holding their entire world together until the day they realize someone else owns it. The first sound I heard that morning wasn't birds or traffic. It was the steady hum of backup generators drifting across the cool Texas air as the rising sun painted the steel frame of the cell tower in soft shades of orange. I stood nearly 180 feet above the ground on the maintenance platform, one gloved hand resting against the galvanized railing while I watched Willow Creek Estates slowly wake beneath me. From up there, every curved street looked perfectly organized. Every freshly cut lawn seemed identical. Every expensive roof reflected the early light with polished precision. It looked like the kind of neighborhood that appeared on real estate brochures, the kind that promised security, convenience, and peace of mind. At the entrance, the automated front gate slid open and closed every few seconds as residents headed toward work, trusting technology they barely noticed. Delivery vans rolled through after scanning digital credentials. Security cameras quietly tracked every vehicle entering the subdivision. Visitors checked in through an app. Even the clubhouse lights adjusted themselves automatically according to the sunrise schedule programmed months earlier. Everything seemed effortless. That illusion always fascinated me because I understood exactly how much hidden infrastructure it took to make effortless look easy. My name is Ryan Carter, and while most people in that neighborhood recognized my pickup truck, almost nobody knew what I actually did. They assumed I was another contractor performing routine inspections. Some waved politely when I drove past. Others barely looked at me. They never imagined I spent more time above their community than inside it. From where I stood, I could see nearly everything. The elementary school beyond the trees. The grocery store 2 miles west. The water tower rising over the highway. And directly below me, a crowd slowly gathered beside the front entrance where colorful balloons and freshly printed banners celebrated the unveiling of the HOA's newest smart access system. Right in the center of that celebration stood Susan Mitchell. Even from this distance, I recognized her confident posture as she greeted homeowners with practiced enthusiasm. She smiled, shook hands, pointed proudly toward the upgraded security kiosks, and spoke with the unmistakable confidence of someone convinced she had built the safest neighborhood in the county. People applauded as she explained how the new digital gate codes, mobile credentials, visitor scheduling, and security monitoring represented the future of community living. They admired the polished touchscreen displays. They complimented the convenience. They praised the investment their HOA had made. Looking down from the tower, I couldn't help smiling to myself. Every phone in every pocket below depended on the antennas surrounding me. Every smart gate command traveled through equipment only a few feet away from where I stood. Every authentication request, every visitor notification, every connected security feature relied on signals beginning right here before quietly disappearing into invisible waves crossing the morning sky. The residents celebrated technology they could see, while completely overlooking the one structure making all of it possible. They admired the gates. I understood the network. They trusted the software. I respected the signal. And what nobody standing beneath those banners realized that beautiful Texas morning was that only a week earlier, after months of quiet negotiations and stacks of legal paperwork signed inside a small county office, the only cell tower serving their entire HOA no longer belonged to the telecommunications company they all assumed controlled it. It belonged to me. Most people think wireless signals are mysterious because they cannot see them, but there is nothing mysterious about infrastructure. Every connection begins somewhere, travels through something, and depends on someone maintaining equipment that most people never notice. My father taught me that lesson long before I ever climbed my first tower. When I was 12 years old, he drove me across rural Texas in an old white service truck that smelled like coffee, engine oil, and sun-baked vinyl seats. While other fathers spent Saturday mornings coaching baseball or taking their kids fishing, mine packed climbing gear, inspection binders, voltage meters, and spare connectors into the truck before sunrise. He always smiled whenever I asked why we had to leave so early. He would simply say, "The network never sleeps, son, so neither does responsibility." Back then I did not fully understand what he meant. I only knew that every weekend seemed to involve another lonely tower standing over empty fields, highways, or quiet neighborhoods that barely acknowledged its existence. While families gathered for cookouts or youth soccer games, my father was checking grounding systems, tightening mounting brackets, inspecting backup batteries, testing emergency generators, and recording every detail inside weathered maintenance logs. At first, I thought the work looked repetitive. Then one afternoon, everything changed. We stopped at a small communications site outside a farming town after a severe thunderstorm had passed through the night before. Nothing appeared damaged. The antennas were still standing. The equipment shelter looked untouched. The lights inside the cabinet blinked exactly as they should. I remember asking him why we had driven nearly 90 miles just to look at something that seemed perfectly fine. Instead of answering immediately, he opened the shelter door and pointed toward a fiber connection no thicker than my thumb. One protective sleeve had shifted only a fraction of an inch because of vibration. I laughed and told him nobody would ever notice something so small. He looked directly at me and quietly replied, "Exactly. That is why we notice it before everyone else notices the consequences." That sentence stayed with me for the rest of my life. As I grew older, I learned every piece of infrastructure carried the same invisible burden. Water systems, electrical substations, communication towers, and transportation networks all shared one truth. Success looked invisible because failure attracted all the attention. Years later, after earning my engineering certifications and spending countless hours maintaining communication networks across Texas, I discovered that Willow Creek Estates operated almost exactly the way my father described decades earlier. The residents admired convenience. They celebrated innovation. They downloaded applications, scanned visitor codes, and trusted digital security without wondering how any of it actually worked. Meanwhile, every automated gate request, every resident notification, every synchronized security update quietly traveled through equipment that required constant inspections, scheduled maintenance, backup power, environmental monitoring, and carefully documented compliance. Susan Mitchell often spoke about building the community of tomorrow, and perhaps she truly believed she had. But every ambitious system she proudly introduced rested upon a foundation she had never taken the time to understand. Standing on that tower that morning, listening to applause drift upward through the crisp Texas air, I remembered my father's calm voice echoing inside my head once again. People admire the application. Engineers protect the signal. And sometimes the quietest lesson becomes the one that changes everything. Over the next several weeks, Willow Creek Estates transformed itself into what Susan Mitchell proudly called the most connected neighborhood in the county. Every monthly board meeting introduced another improvement designed to make daily life feel smoother, faster, and more secure. New license plate recognition cameras appeared at each entrance. Visitor registration became entirely digital. Residents received notifications through a mobile application instead of paper mail. Smart package lockers arrived beside the clubhouse. Parking permits were linked to electronic accounts. Even the pool entrance switched from plastic key cards to personalized digital credentials. At every ribbon cutting, Susan stood confidently before smiling homeowners and spoke about innovation, efficiency, and the future of modern community living. The applause grew louder each time another project was completed. I usually watched from a distance. Sometimes I was finishing a routine inspection near the equipment shelter while another celebration unfolded below. Other times I simply drove past in my pickup truck after completing maintenance reports. Very few people recognized me as anything more than another contractor. That anonymity suited me perfectly because it allowed me to observe without becoming part of the conversation. I noticed something that most residents never considered. Every new feature Susan introduced depended on another layer of communication moving through the same invisible network. The cameras did not simply record images. They continuously transmitted data. The smart gates did not magically recognize authorized vehicles. They verified credentials through connected systems. Visitor approvals traveled through secure servers before returning authorization in seconds. The community application synchronized information throughout the day, updating schedules, announcements, maintenance requests, and access permissions. None of those conveniences existed in isolation. They functioned together because reliable communication connected every component. One afternoon, I attended an open community technology showcase that the HOA organized inside the clubhouse. Susan enthusiastically demonstrated how a homeowner could unlock the front gate from a smartphone, schedule a visitor before they arrived, reserve the clubhouse online, receive security alerts, and even monitor community events through a single application. The audience responded exactly as she expected. Heads nodded with admiration. Questions centered around convenience rather than infrastructure. People complimented the software interface, the elegant displays, and the modern appearance of everything they could touch. Nobody asked where the information actually traveled before appearing on those screens. Nobody wondered how the signals reached their destination every second of every day. I quietly accepted a cup of coffee, listened to the presentation, and studied the architectural diagrams displayed on easels near the entrance. The diagrams illustrated cameras, gates, wireless access points, maintenance buildings, and neighborhood amenities. They were beautifully designed, colorful, and easy to understand. One thing was missing. There was no representation of the communication tower standing less than half a mile away. It was as though the foundation of the entire network had simply vanished from the drawing. Susan eventually noticed me examining the display boards. She walked over with her usual confident smile and said, "Pretty impressive, is it not? We have built something people will be talking about for years." I smiled politely and replied, "It is certainly an impressive system." She thanked me before greeting another group of homeowners, completely unaware that my answer had been carefully chosen. I was complimenting the engineering, not the assumption that anyone truly controlled it. As I left the clubhouse that afternoon, I looked toward the familiar silhouette of the tower rising quietly above the trees. It stood exactly where it always had, unnoticed by nearly everyone celebrating the technology below. The higher the neighborhood reached toward becoming completely connected, the more important that overlooked structure quietly became. People often imagine that buying something important happens in a dramatic moment with cameras, applause, and headlines. The truth is usually far less exciting to anyone watching from the outside. The most valuable transaction of my life happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon inside a small county law office with beige walls, old wooden bookshelves, and a coffee maker that had probably been there for 20 years. There were no reporters waiting outside and no celebration afterward. Just a stack of legal documents, several property maps, engineering surveys, lease agreements, easement records, and a closing attorney who carefully reviewed every page before sliding them across the conference table. The telecommunications company had been restructuring portions of its regional infrastructure portfolio for months. Their focus had shifted toward larger metropolitan markets, and several independently managed sites were quietly offered for sale to qualified buyers willing to maintain existing service obligations. Most investors ignored this particular property because it appeared ordinary. A single communications tower standing on a few fenced acres outside a suburban neighborhood did not attract much attention. I understood something they did not. The steel tower itself was valuable, but the real importance rested inside the paperwork attached to it. Along with the structure came the equipment shelter, the emergency generator pad, utility connections, maintenance access roads, underground conduit rights, fiber backhaul easements, and long-term ground leases that had been carefully negotiated years before the neighborhood expanded around them. Every page described responsibilities just as clearly as ownership. Existing carriers retained equipment rights. Service commitments remained unchanged. Scheduled inspections continued without interruption. Operational standards stayed exactly the same. Nothing about the communications network would suddenly change simply because ownership transferred. That consistency mattered to me. I was not interested in disrupting service. I believed infrastructure should become more dependable, not less. After signing the final document, I placed my initials beside the last acknowledgement, accepted a neatly organized binder containing certified copies of every agreement, and shook hands with the attorney. He smiled and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Carter. Everything has been officially recorded with the county." Those words sounded remarkably ordinary, yet I understood how significant they really were. Driving home that evening, I did not feel powerful. I felt responsible. Before sunrise the following morning, I unlocked the service gate using my own authorized credentials, walked the familiar gravel path toward the tower, and began inspecting equipment exactly as I had done hundreds of times before. I checked battery voltage levels, confirmed generator readiness, reviewed environmental monitoring logs, examined grounding connections, and verified routine maintenance schedules. Nothing looked different because nothing needed to. That quiet consistency was exactly the point. Meanwhile, life inside Willow Creek Estates continued without interruption. Susan Mitchell announced another phase of digital improvements during the next board meeting. Contractors installed additional connected devices throughout the neighborhood. Residents praised the convenience of technology that seemed to function effortlessly every hour of every day. Nobody noticed that the legal owner responsible for protecting the signals supporting those conveniences had quietly changed. They saw software updates, polished applications, and modern security features. I saw maintenance schedules, compliance records, inspection checklists, and carefully preserved legal rights. The higher the neighborhood continued building its digital future, the more every new improvement rested upon documents now stored securely inside the binder sitting in the locked cabinet of my office. The more sophisticated the neighborhood became, the less anyone seemed interested in understanding the foundation supporting it. Every month the board approved another technology upgrade. More security cameras appeared along walking trails. Additional wireless access points expanded coverage around the clubhouse and fitness center. The management application introduced digital voting for community issues, online maintenance requests, and instant notifications for neighborhood events. Residents praised the convenience every time a new feature appeared on their phones. They congratulated Susan Mitchell for keeping Willow Creek Estates ahead of nearby communities. She accepted every compliment with confidence, often reminding homeowners that the neighborhood was becoming a model for modern residential living. I never argued with that description because the technology truly was impressive. What fascinated me was how little attention anyone paid to the infrastructure quietly carrying all of it. Every morning before most residents finished breakfast, I unlocked the equipment shelter and followed the same inspection routine my father had taught me years earlier. I reviewed environmental sensors, verified cooling systems, checked battery health, confirmed generator fuel levels, examined grounding connections, inspected fiber terminations, and recorded every observation inside detailed maintenance logs. Nothing was rushed because reliable systems were built through consistency, not shortcuts. When inspections ended, I returned to my office where another routine had gradually become just as important. One locked filing cabinet slowly filled with carefully organized records. County property maps occupied one section. Ground lease agreements rested in another. Utility easements were separated by color-coded tabs. Fiber backhaul documentation, engineering drawings, maintenance histories, equipment inventories, compliance certificates, inspection reports, tax records, and telecommunications licensing references each received their own labeled folders. I scanned every document into encrypted digital archives while preserving certified paper copies inside fire-resistant storage. My goal was simple. If anyone ever questioned the ownership, operation, or responsibilities connected to the tower, every answer would already exist inside organized documentation instead of uncertain memories. Meanwhile, Susan continued expanding the community's digital ecosystem with remarkable enthusiasm. During one board meeting, she proudly announced that visitor management would soon become entirely automated, allowing residents to authorize guests remotely through their mobile devices without speaking to gate attendants. Another presentation introduced additional cloud-connected security monitoring intended to improve response times and simplify daily operations. Homeowners applauded each announcement because every improvement appeared seamless from their perspective. One afternoon, I attended a public meeting simply to listen. Large presentation screens displayed colorful diagrams showing connected gates, cameras, sensors, wireless devices, and community software working together as one integrated system. The illustrations were polished and professional, but I quietly noticed the same omission I had seen before. The communications backbone remained invisible. It was almost as though the network existed by itself without physical infrastructure supporting every connection. After the meeting ended, several residents gathered around Susan to congratulate her. One homeowner proudly remarked that the community now controlled everything with the touch of a screen. Susan smiled and replied, "Technology gives us complete confidence because everything works together." I understood exactly what she meant, yet I also understood something she had not considered. Systems only work together because someone maintained the foundation connecting them every hour of every day. Walking back toward my truck beneath the fading Texas sunset, I glanced once more at the tower rising above the trees. The neighborhood continued celebrating visible innovation, while the invisible backbone quietly carried every signal exactly as designed, supported by documents, responsibilities, and ownership that remained almost entirely unnoticed. The first sign that something was changing did not come from a lawyer or a government office. It came from a certified envelope sitting inside my mailbox on an unusually warm Thursday afternoon. The return address belonged to the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. I opened it at my kitchen table beside a cup of black coffee and found a formally written notice reminding me that all structures located near the community were expected to comply with recently adopted architectural appearance standards. The language remained polite throughout the letter, but its purpose was obvious. The board wanted greater influence over anything visible from inside the neighborhood, including the aging communications tower standing beyond their entrance. I read every sentence twice before placing the document into a folder instead of the recycling bin. My father always believed paperwork deserved respect because it often revealed far more than conversations ever did. The following week, another letter arrived inviting me to attend a meeting with several board members to discuss what they described as future community improvements. I accepted without hesitation. On the scheduled afternoon, I walked into the clubhouse conference room, carrying nothing more than a leather notebook and a pen. Susan Mitchell greeted me professionally before introducing several committee members responsible for neighborhood planning. Large presentation boards displayed artist renderings of expanded landscaping, decorative fencing, enhanced lighting, and additional security features planned around the entrance corridor leading toward the tower access road. Susan explained that the community hoped to create a more uniform appearance while strengthening its identity. She spoke confidently about visual consistency, neighborhood standards, and long-term planning. Throughout the presentation, I listened carefully without interrupting. When she finished, she asked whether I would support the proposed improvements affecting the surrounding area. I smiled politely and replied that I always supported well-planned projects built upon complete information. She seemed satisfied with that answer, even though I had intentionally left it open-ended. Before leaving, I requested copies of the presentation materials for my records. Susan gladly provided them, believing they simply reflected another successful planning session. Back at my office, I placed every handout beside the growing collection of documents already filling my filing cabinet. Then I began adding new material. County plat maps showing property boundaries, recorded easement agreements, utility corridor surveys, engineering drawings identifying underground fiber routes, environmental compliance records, emergency generator permits, access road maintenance responsibilities, historic lease amendments, photographs documenting existing conditions from multiple seasons. I carefully organized each page in chronological order, creating a complete timeline that connected decades of infrastructure history into one continuous record. At the same time, I continued my normal inspection routine without changing a single maintenance procedure. Batteries were tested on schedule. Cooling systems operated within specifications. Backup generators completed monthly exercise cycles. Signal performance remained stable. Every maintenance report was signed, dated, and archived. I understood something Susan did not yet realize. Opinions could shape meetings, but documents shaped decisions. Assumptions could influence conversations, but recorded facts remained unchanged no matter who occupied a board seat. Standing beneath the tower after finishing another routine inspection, I watched evening sunlight reflect from the antennas high above while the neighborhood quietly carried on below. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary. Yet inside my office, Each carefully filed record had become another piece of a much larger picture that was steadily approaching the moment when every invisible connection would finally be understood. The turning point arrived without sirens, headlines, or dramatic announcements. It began on an ordinary Monday morning when a severe thunderstorm swept across central Texas during the night, bringing heavy rain, strong wind, and several brief interruptions to commercial power throughout the county. By sunrise, utility crews were already restoring electrical service in nearby neighborhoods, and as part of standard emergency procedures, regional communications infrastructure operators initiated routine inspections of critical network sites to verify backup systems had functioned correctly. I received the notification before 6 o'clock that morning and arrived at the tower just as the first maintenance vehicles entered the gravel access road. The emergency generator had performed exactly as designed. Battery reserves remained well within operational specifications. Environmental monitoring systems showed stable temperatures throughout the equipment shelter despite the overnight outage. I completed my preliminary inspection before greeting the engineering team responsible for the broader regional assessment. They introduced themselves, reviewed identification, and began comparing generator logs, maintenance records, and automated performance reports with the information already stored inside their systems. Everything matched perfectly because every inspection, every service interval, and every documented repair had been completed exactly according to schedule. A little later, another group arrived, including representatives responsible for reviewing utility coordination involving nearby community infrastructure. Word of the inspection quickly reached Willow Creek Estates, and before long Susan Mitchell drove toward the site accompanied by several board members. She stepped out of her vehicle looking more curious than concerned, clearly assuming the inspection involved temporary storm recovery. We exchanged polite greetings before the lead engineer invited everyone to gather around a folding table where large property maps and infrastructure diagrams had been carefully arranged. He began explaining how communication reliability depended not only upon antennas, but also upon backup power systems, utility easements, underground fiber connections, equipment shelters, maintenance access routes, and recorded operational responsibilities. As each document appeared on the table, I recognized every page from the organized files resting inside my office cabinet. The engineer pointed toward the communication pathways serving the surrounding area and calmly explained that the neighborhood security systems, automated entrance gates, resident authentication services, visitor management platform, cloud-synchronized cameras, and numerous connected community functions all relied upon network connectivity originating through this site before continuing across the broader telecommunications system. Susan listened attentively, occasionally asking thoughtful questions about redundancy and maintenance. Then came the moment that quietly changed the entire conversation. The engineer unfolded the officially recorded ownership documents together with the associated easement agreements and explained that operational responsibility for maintaining the communications property had transferred through a properly recorded transaction several months earlier. He looked toward me and said, "Mr. Carter has continued every maintenance obligation without interruption, which is why service remained stable throughout last night's power event." Susan turned toward me with genuine surprise rather than anger. For the first time since we had met, I could see she was no longer looking at me as a contractor occasionally inspecting equipment. She was beginning to understand the relationship between ownership, responsibility, and the invisible systems supporting everything the community depended upon every single day. No dramatic confrontation followed. No raised voices interrupted the meeting. The facts simply remained where they had always been, printed clearly on recorded documents reviewed by professionals whose only interest was accuracy. As the engineers packed their equipment and completed their reports, I looked once more toward the tower rising quietly against the clear Texas sky. It had not become more important overnight. People had simply finally taken the time to understand what had been standing there all along. The days following the inspection felt noticeably different, not because the neighborhood suddenly changed, but because people finally began asking better questions. Instead of discussing only new applications or additional security features, conversations gradually shifted toward reliability, maintenance, long-term planning, and the infrastructure quietly supporting everything they depended upon. Susan Mitchell contacted me a few days later and asked whether I would be willing to attend another board meeting, this time not as an observer, but as someone who could answer technical questions. I accepted because my goal had never been to embarrass anyone. Reliable systems worked best when everyone understood their responsibilities. The meeting began much differently than previous ones. There were no oversized promotional displays or promises about the newest technology. Instead, engineering diagrams, property maps, and maintenance schedules covered the conference table. Susan opened the discussion by acknowledging that the board had learned valuable information during the recent inspection and wanted to ensure future planning reflected the complete picture rather than only the visible portions of the neighborhood's technology. She then invited me to explain, in simple language, how the communications infrastructure supported the community each day. I stood beside the diagrams and pointed first to the tower, then to the underground fiber routes, emergency generator, equipment shelter, utility easements, and maintenance access road. I explained that none of these components existed to control residents. Their purpose was to provide dependable communication under ordinary conditions as well as during severe weather, utility outages, and unexpected emergencies. Every automated gate request, every visitor approval, every camera notification, every resident application update, and every connected service depended upon equipment that required continuous maintenance, accurate documentation, and careful planning. I emphasized that ownership also carried responsibility. Purchasing the property had never given me permission to interfere with anyone's daily life. On the contrary, it obligated me to keep the network operating reliably for everyone who depended upon it. Several homeowners asked thoughtful questions about backup power, inspection schedules, and emergency preparedness. Others admitted they had never realized how many independent systems quietly worked together before a gate opened or a notification appeared on a smartphone. Susan listened carefully throughout the discussion, occasionally taking notes beside copies of engineering drawings that now looked very different to her than they had only a few weeks earlier. When the meeting concluded, she approached me privately and said, "I spent years focusing on the neighborhood people could see. I never stopped to think about everything supporting it behind the scenes." I smiled and replied, "Most infrastructure succeeds by remaining invisible. When it does its job well, people rarely have a reason to notice it." She nodded thoughtfully before extending her hand. From that point forward, communication between us became professional instead of uncertain. Future planning meetings included engineering reviews before new technology projects received approval. Maintenance access routes remained protected inside updated development plans. Landscaping designs respected utility easements instead of crossing them. Every proposal now began with one simple question that had rarely been asked before. What infrastructure makes this possible? Walking back toward the tower that evening beneath a clear Texas sky, I realized nothing about the steel structure had changed. The generators still hummed quietly. The antennas still carried invisible signals across the county. The maintenance schedule remained exactly the same. The only real difference was that the people below finally understood that lasting progress was never built upon appearances alone. It was built upon responsibility that quietly endured long after applause had faded. Several months passed, and life inside Willow Creek Estates settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and quietly different. The front gates continued opening smoothly every morning. Delivery drivers checked in without delays. Residents unlocked community amenities with their phones, received neighborhood updates instantly, and relied on security systems that operated so consistently most people stopped thinking about them altogether. That was exactly how dependable infrastructure was supposed to work. It was never designed to draw attention to itself. One crisp autumn morning, I climbed the tower before sunrise for another scheduled inspection. The air carried the cool scent of cedar and freshly cut grass, and the first light spread across the rooftops below exactly as it had hundreds of mornings before. My inspection checklist had not changed. I verified battery capacity, tested the emergency generator, reviewed environmental monitoring data, inspected grounding connections, confirmed antenna alignment, and signed another maintenance report before placing it inside the weatherproof service binder. Consistency had always been the true measure of responsibility. As I climbed back down, I noticed Susan Mitchell walking toward the access gate, carrying 2 paper coffee cups. She smiled in a way I had never seen during our earliest conversations, not with the confidence of someone making an announcement, but with the appreciation of someone who had learned an unexpected lesson. She handed me one of the coffees and quietly said, "I used to believe the most important part of this community was everything people could see." I thanked her, took a sip, and waited. After a brief silence, she looked toward the tower rising above us and continued, "Now I realize the strongest foundations are usually the ones nobody notices." I nodded because there was nothing left to argue about. The documents had already spoken. The inspections had confirmed the facts. The network had continued doing exactly what it was designed to do without interruption. What had changed was not ownership, but understanding. Over the following months, the board adopted new planning procedures requiring engineering reviews before major technology projects moved forward. Utility easements remained protected during landscaping improvements. Maintenance access roads stayed unobstructed. Contractors coordinated with infrastructure owners before beginning new installations. The conversations became less about appearances and more about long-term reliability. Homeowners still appreciated convenience, but they also began recognizing the value of preparation, documentation, and responsible stewardship. Every time I visited the tower, I noticed small reminders of that change. Maintenance vehicles could reach the site without difficulty. Utility markers remained visible instead of hidden beneath decorative shrubs. Development plans respected the systems already serving the neighborhood rather than competing with them. None of those adjustments attracted applause, yet every one of them strengthened the community far more than another promotional presentation ever could. Sometimes people ask whether owning the tower made me feel powerful. My answer has always been the same. Ownership never mattered as much as responsibility. Anyone can admire technology when everything works perfectly. The real test comes from quietly maintaining the systems that keep working year after year without demanding recognition. As I locked the service gate behind me and looked back one final time, the tower stood exactly as it always had, carrying invisible signals across the Texas sky, while families began another ordinary day below. Most residents would never think about the structure watching over their neighborhood, and that was perfectly fine with me. My father once told me that people admire the application, but engineers protect the signal. Standing there with the morning sun warming the steel above me, I finally understood that his lesson had never been about towers at all. It had always been about earning trust through quiet responsibility, because true justice is never the loudest voice in the room. It is the steady foundation that keeps everyone connected long after the conversation is over.